We're live now, gentlemen. Go ahead and take
everybody. I think we'll call the meeting to order. It is 6:01 on the 7th of April. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated safety guidelines put in place by the CDC, the state of Utah, and local health departments, UDWR will conduct the April 2020 Regional Advisory Council and Utah Wildlife Board meetings using fully electronic format. I'd like to stop briefly here and thank Paul Judge and Michael Christensen for helping us get all the technology put together. I really appreciate it. This meeting format was approved through an executive order by Governor Herbert and will be used in place of the in-person public meeting that usually occurs around the state. I'd like to welcome all of the RAC members, and I'll do a roll call so I know who's here. And so will you please say I'm here? Remember to keep your systems on mute. Click them off mute, wait about a half a second or a second, and then respond, and then turn them back on mute. So I'll call everybody's name. Please respond if you're here. AJ Maurer.
I'm here.
Ben Louder.
I'm here.
Christine Schmitz.
I'm here.
Danny Potts.
I'm certainly here.
Eric Reed. Nothing from Eric. Jake
Yes,
Steele.
I'm here.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Jake Steele. Okay, Josh Leonard.
I'm here.
Ken Strong. I know Ken's here. Ken, are you out there? Okay, Luke Decker.
Okay, I'm here. I couldn't get it off you.
Thank you, Ken. Luke Decker.
I'm here.
Mike Christensen. Mike, are you there?
Hey, Brock.
Yeah.
This is Scott Root. He's just
Yep.
trying to connect now. I'm helping him.
Okay, perfect. Then he'll be here. Scott Jensen. No Scott. And Steve Lund. No Steve Lund. So it looks like 4 absents. We definitely have a quorum. If somebody, we'll move on from there. I'd like to welcome all the DWR staff, specifically those that provided presentations and are available to answer questions throughout this meeting. Those include Covey Jones, the big game coordinator, Chad Wilson, the private lands public wildlife coordinator, Brad Crompton, the Southeast Region Assistant Wildlife Manager, Darren DeBluey, the Game Mammals Program Coordinator, Riley Peck, the Central Region Wildlife Manager, and Greg Hansen from the Attorney General's Office. I'd also like to welcome all the public. I really appreciate you participating. This is going to be different because we can't hear from you, and I'm a little disappointed by that, but I know that I have, and I've talked to several other people that have also read all of the comments that you've submitted through the online system, and we appreciate those comments. Before we move on, I'll make one suggestion about those comments. When somebody from the public says, I don't agree with this recommendation, but doesn't provide any specific information, that doesn't help us a whole bit. I'd really like to have specific details about what you don't agree with on a recommendation that's coming forward so that we can discuss it as a RAC. As you know, the public won't be able to comment during this meeting. However, you've had plenty of chance to do that. Okay. I'm going to turn the time over to Jason to give a regional update while I find the agenda. Jason.
All right, thanks, Brock. Let me pull that up here real quick. I think overall as a region, things continue to go well, considering the current directives associated with COVID-19. Most of our staff in our office are teleworking, with only a few reporting to the office to work the front desk and to make sure bills get paid. We do have staff that are working in the field, and they continue to practice social distancing to complete their work. Just a couple of things from each of our sections I'd like to share with you. From our outreach section, I think most are aware that many of our outreach events have been canceled for April. Some of those include like Mountain Goat Viewing Day, Turkey Hunt seminars, some Utah Lake Fishing seminar. Many of the youth community fishing programs on our community ponds have been put on hold or postponed until directives are changed. However, our staff has been pretty creative, and they've worked with a couple of groups to make video presentations to allow students to continue to learn from their home computers. So it's been a pretty novel approach from our outreach section to make that possible, and I applaud them for their efforts on that. Dedicated hunters is another topic I wanted to touch on. We continue to work with many partners and some of our local organizations on brainstorming possible projects that would work with the current guidelines. Hopefully we can get some of those online before we get our new set of dedicated hunters near the end of May. From our habitat section, they're starting to get geared up for weed spraying on our WMAs. This is an annual project. Starts in the spring like now as the weeds start to come on. But as you can imagine, all of our sections have challenges with hiring seasonal employees and doing jobs that maintain the social distancing. So we're having to prioritize regional work and find novel ways to complete that. This will be the last year that we provide emergency grazing on some of our WMAs to help mitigate for the 2018 fires in the south end of Utah County. We do have several WMAs that we hold in a grass bank through time to help with these types of emergency situations. And we anticipate that next year, those grazers would be able to get back on those fires, and we wouldn't need to supply those that emergency grazing on our WMAs. For our wildlife section, trying to continue with assignments. They've been successful responding to nuisance calls, and there continues to be depredation incidents that they respond to. They're being strategic on what's getting done. A couple of things coming up and going on right now are some sage-grouse butt counts throughout the region, as well as some spring habitat assessments that'll start soon. From our aquatic section, hopefully those that like to fish on the Provo River saw an announcement the other day of some higher than normal flows that will be coming down below Deer Creek Dam. Over the next week or so, they're testing a new valve at the dam and be letting water out at different levels throughout the next week. I saw today it was supposed to start yesterday, I believe, but they're having some troubles with the valve operating correctly. So they'll be probably delaying that a few days, but this will impact both fishing and safety on the lower Provo River. And we just encourage you to plan accordingly and check our website for updates on that, or absolutely call any of our aquatic biologists for more information. In the spring, we do some gillnet samples at the Yuba Reservoir, and they saw some pretty nice fish down there in their sampling. They saw high densities of healthy walleye averaging around 16 inches. And they did catch some that were averaging or ranging from 18 to 25 inches as well. So some nice healthy fish there. They also found some fat rainbow and a few wipers averaging 16 inches. We continue to work that management plan that was put together by the group. And one of the challenges is the seasonal water levels on Yuba Reservoir. But we'll continue to work on meeting the goals of that management plan. In our law enforcement section, we've had quite a few changes over the last several months, staffing changes in the section. I'll just run through those really quickly. Matt Briggs was promoted as our region lieutenant. We had 2 sergeant positions that opened up, and Jay Topham was promoted as a sergeant in the South crew, and Sean Spencer was promoted as a sergeant in our Wasatch crew. We also had several vacancies that we've had for several years now, and we're glad to be able to get those filled. Greg Baird will be our new JUAB officer, filling behind Jay Topham, who's promoted. And Devin Shirley will be our new North Utah County officer. They'll be transferring in from other regions. Additionally, we have 8 officers, brand new officers, that were sworn in April 1st. And fortunately, 2 of those officers will be coming to our region to fill some vacant positions. Joseph Lair will be our new Salt Lake County officer, and Jason Anderson will be our new Bluffdale American Fork officer. So we're really excited to get our staffing filled and for these new officers to be coming into the region. Other than that, our officers continue to patrol and make contacts in the field. As you can imagine, it's a little bit challenging, and they have to be creative as far as social distancing goes. Other than that, I don't have any more information to share unless any of the RAC members have any questions they'd like to ask.
Are there any questions from the RAC? Okay, thank you, Jason. I'll now give a brief update from the last board meeting. If you recall, the last board meeting primarily discussed bears and brine shrimp. There was a motion from the board meeting to limit the number of dogs statewide on pursuit to 16 and to limit the number of non-resident pursuit permits on the LaSalle, the San Juan, and the Book Cliffs to 2 non-residents and keep residents unlimited. And that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to add an online ethics course for bear orientation that instituted pursuit ethics, and that passed unanimously. There was a motion to increase the number of tags on the Beaver, the Chalk Creek, and the Book Cliffs by 25%, to increase the number of pit permits on all the remaining units by 10%, except the units that had 10 or less tags and keep those the same. That motion passed unanimously. And there was a motion to accept the remainder of the bear and cougar recommendation amendments, and that passed unanimously. The wolf plan was passed unanimously, and the brine shrimp COR rule amendment was also passed unanimously. And that is the update from the last board meeting. The next thing on the agenda is the Bucks, Bulls, and once in a lifetime permit recommendations. Hopefully all of you have had a chance to watch Kobe's presentation online and had a chance to read all the comments. I think we will first have Jason provide a summary of the online comments, and then we will move to questions from the RAC. Jason.
Really quick, Brock.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mike.
So our RAC didn't receive an update from the previous wildlife board meeting that discussed the mule deer plan and that. Do we have a report on that? I believe our RAC met on the December 3rd and the wildlife. So we never got an update on that previous one, did we?
Let me look for the minutes from that board meeting, and I will try to provide an update. I don't know if I can find those minutes or not.
I'll try sending those to you, Brock, as well. I think I've got a copy of those to send.
Brock,
I can give an update specific to the mule deer plan and how that passed.
Covey, if you have that available, I think the region would be most interested in hearing anything that changed from what the region thought was going to happen.
Okay. So the changes to the mule deer plan were as follows. First of all, there was a motion to allow a skull free of brain matter and lymph nodes, and that passed. And then they left it up to the division to word that. And we worked with Annette, our veterinarian, and we were able to come up with a definition. If you look online, you'll see that change in there now. There's also a motion to the late season muzzleloader hunts to allow them to be anywhere from 5 to 0.5% or 0.5%, and to be at the biologist's discretion for the unit, and that passed as well. There was a motion to make it a 5-year plan instead of a 7-year plan, and that passed. It's a 5-year plan. There was a motion in the management plan. There was language that said that we're going to manage differently, and that language was left, that we would take into account not just buck-doe ratios, but that we take into account adult and fawn survival as well when we made general season recommendations, because those general season units are so dependent upon yearling bucks coming into that population. And so that passed, but the way it was written before was that we would manage to the buck-doe ratio annually. And now that changed to just make progress toward the buck-doe ratio annually. There was a motion made that in the plan, when we wrote it, we intended to lock down the unit buck-doe ratios and have them be set by the statewide plan, similar to how the age objectives are set by the statewide out plan. And there was a motion made not to lock those down in the statewide plan and to evaluate those in the unit plans. And then those are the major changes that I have that came out of that board meeting, just for the mule deer management plan portion.
Thank you, Covey. I think Stacy just sent me the summary of all the board discussions. She did. Let's see. There was a motion to continue the agreement between the 1999 agreement between Castle Valley and UDWR to limit hunting on 1,400 acres to primitive weapons, and that passed unanimously. Covey discussed the motion about the skull plate. Instead of skull plate, it was brain-free skull that was approved. I'm looking through really quick to see what was passed. There was a motion to combine the Willard Peak Mountain goat seasons into one season and provide a longer season date, and that passed. All the other dates, the recommendation on all the seasons passed as presented. There was a motion to approve Junction Valley CWMU changes presented, which would to include some public land on their CWMU that had no other access, and that passed on a vote of 3-2. The rest of the CWMU management plan was passed. There was a motion to add the general season landowner and general season landowner appreciation permits to the exception list, which exceptions from losing your points, I believe. The rest of the proposed rule was accepted as presented. And that's all I've got. Okay, now, are there any comments from the RAC? Okay, Jason, you want to summarize the Bucks Bulls once in a lifetime public comments?
Yeah, thank you, Brock. I think all of you you received anyway the comments from all that came up from the online process, as well as receiving the pie chart that was created for that. For the Bucks Bulls and once in a lifetime recommendations, we had quite a bit of support. We had almost 82% support for the proposal, 5% were neutral, and 13% were opposed to the proposal. I will mention there were quite a few comments supporting the reduction in the general season tags on the Oker-Stansberry unit. And then there was a few other comments throughout there regarding some numbers on ELF, but as far as the support, it was 82% on that.
Thank you, Jason. Anybody from the RAC have questions for Covey, the presenter?
Brock, this is Ben. I've got some questions. I'll start with a question of my own regarding on the Bison on the Henry Mountains. The recommendation is a pretty big cut, and Cove and I have talked through why, and I understand that. But my question to him is on the archery only hunter's choice hunt. There's only 2 tags, 1 resident, 1 non-resident. Would there be any harm in adding a tag to that hunt so that we could have a bonus point tag in that hunt for residents?
First of all, yeah, Ben, the rationale behind, you know why the rationale behind cutting those. We had a really poor cow-calf ratios. We were down in the 15 calves per 100 cow range. And we've hit those herds pretty hard the last couple of years with drought and other things that have been going on. Biologically, adding 1 permit down there to the archery, not going to have a huge impact if I'm honest. They were cut back a bit along with the other permits, but I understand the rationale of wanting a bonus point tag in there as well.
Okay, thanks, Covey. Appreciate it. That's the only question I've got at this time. I was about to jump into comments, but thinking that we're following the same RAC process, right? This is questions. So
that's correct. I do have to jump in here because I did not ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting in this agenda. I need somebody sitting right next to me, Jason, to remind me when I make a mistake. But Stacy, thank you, Stacy, for listening to this and asking me if I did that. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting that you were sent and the agenda for this meeting.
Brock, this is Ken Strong, and I'll make a motion that we accept both the minutes.
A second?
Second, Mike Christensen.
Thank you, Mike. And now I need to go through a roll call vote. That's what's going to happen on every time we vote on something. I'll call everybody's name and you'll come on and you'll say yes or no. So AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Thank you. Ben Louder.
yes.
Christine Schmitz.
I have to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Danny Potts.
I also have to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting either. Sorry.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Jake Steele. Not here. Josh Leonard,
Yes.
Ken Strong,
Yes.
Luke Decker, Luke,
This is Luke. Sorry, my internet disconnected there really quickly. What are we doing? Are we voting?
voting on the minutes and the agenda. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Mike Christensen,
Yes.
did Scott or Steve join the meeting? Okay, that passes. Any other questions for Covey about the Bucks and Bulls?
Yes. This is Ken Strong. Kobe, I have a question on the Nebo. We keep lowering tags, but we're not meeting the age objective. Can you give me a reason for that, or what you think is happening?
I can give you a reason of what I think's happening, but I think I'll turn that one over to Rusty. And I'll do that with unit specific questions, but I think it was a decision that we made with the last group when we put together the statewide elk plan to manage that a little bit higher age objective than the Manti. And we probably missed the mark is what I would say. I'll turn it over to Rusty if he has anything to add.
You guys hear me there? Maybe not.
We've got you.
Okay. Yeah, I think Covey hit it on the head. There's just something about that unit where we just can't get above a 5.8-year-old bull for whatever reason. So, yeah, maybe it's time to look at that and manage it closer to the Manti. But for now, according to the statewide elk plan, that's kind of what we have to recommend.
I have a question, Mike Christensen. So along those same lines, I think I've been on this a little bit on the Nebo issue. We're overpopulation objective. Why do we not see more antlerless tags if we have to manage to the objective? If the reason for managing to the age objective is because it's in the plan, why are we not doing the same with the antlerless tags?
So that's a good question, Mike. I think we're still within the plan. We didn't do drastic increases this year because we hit them so hard 2 years ago after the fire. We knew we were over, and we killed, I think, 700 cows in 1 year. And so now we kind of had a year where we held steady around like 200 antlerless permits. And what we're seeing now is the counts aren't really jiving with the model exactly. So we don't know if we've got elk coming over from the Manti or what. So it's just kind of hold steady until we have a better idea what's going on. And we're getting a little bit more targeted with those harvests as well, with some of the hunts around Moroni Hills and the late hunt and things like that.
More questions?
I just want to say though, I think that's a good point. I think that this has come up. There are a few units around the state we made changes to in the last elk plan, and if the RAC would like, I think that last year we were busy with the statewide deer plan and doing those things, but revisiting that portion of the statewide elk plan might be a good idea, and seeing after we've been in it since 2015 or 2020, after 5 years. Are we meeting those objectives? And if not, are they wrong? And do we need to be looking at making some changes instead of cutting more permits?
Thank you, Covey and Rusty. And it's a good question, Mike. Other questions?
Yeah, Brock, Ken Strong here. Anti-deer, we're at 64% population objective. itself, and our buck doe ratio is 15 bucks per 100 does, whereas other units percentage of objective, and yet they're lowering permits on the Manti. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll take a stab at that one first. The Manti crosses both the central and the southeastern region. And so we have 3 biologists working together on the Manti. And then if I miss anything, Rusty, would you help me with this too? So as I mentioned before, in the fall, we did general season deer permits completely differently this year, and that we took into account more data. We have more data, so we said, let's use it. Let's use more data. And so we didn't look at just the buck doe ratio. Now, I guess before I get too far down this road, Ken, one thing I should separate off is that we can't affect that population objective through buck hunting. And I understand that the Manti's well below what the population objective of 38,000 is. I understand that we're not there, but we really have to separate that out when we talk about buck hunting and doe hunting or other things, because we didn't base any of our buck permit recommendations on population objectives, because hunting bucks doesn't affect the population in that manner. But if everybody's okay, I'd like to show the group some of the data that we did use, maybe a sheet that we used, and why we didn't cut permits on the Manti. Is that all right, Brock?
I think showing the data only helps us understand, Kobe. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to try to do this. I'll try to share my screen. Let's see. Present now. Entire screen. Share. I have to talk myself through it. And my computer just froze. Let's try this one more time. Okay. All right, Ken, let's look specifically at the Manti, because that's what the question was. And I'll try not to go through this too fast. And if you have more questions after, let me know. Let's blow it up a little bit so that everybody can see it. Okay, so when you look at the Manti population, there's a lot of data on this sheet, and it starts at the top here. I'll highlight it with buck doe ratios and where we're at. So the Manti is a 15 to 17 unit, and we're managing it. And for the last 2 years, we've been towards the top end of that objective. Now, 2017 was down, but if you look at the 3-year average, we're still at over 15, and last year was 16.3. Another really big one that I've talked about before is our fawn doe ratios. Now, we like to see these as close to at least 60 fawns per 100 does as we can get. That's where you have a good feeling, and 56 is a little bit below that, but that's really pretty good. 56 fawns per 100 does is a good number to start with, because we know that we're going to have a lot of fawn mortality on average compared with adults. Another thing is to look at the population and what it's doing, not the number that it is, but what it's doing. So other populations around the state have really taken heavy hits and lost a lot of deer. And the central portion of the state, the Manti, the Nebo, the Wasatch, some of this has been quite a bit more resilient, and it's avoided some of that. So this last year, the model population estimate on the Manti was 24,400. So we lost a few deer, but not nearly, more relatively stable overall. If we look back at 18 and 19, just to see what our adult survival was last year, it was good, and that's the reason for that. Even though fawn survival was quite a bit lower. So coming down, what this sheet does, takes into account permits issued and harvest success. And you'll see that here. So this is the traditional permits, or the permits we've been issuing on that unit. Back in 2016, we're up to 9,200. and now we're down to 8,100. And then it looks at percent success or percent of those permits that were filled. And we're hovering right around that 30% mark, with last year being just a little bit below that. Our 5-year average being 28% success. And on a general season units managed for 15 to 17 bucks per 100 dose, that's exactly where you would see yourself, is right around that 30% mark. So we're right on there. So this is where the sheet takes the biologist and some work and some collars. But we looked at our deer and where they were, and then we predicted forward based on how fat they were, based on body fat, based on fawn weight. We looked at just herd health and conditions in December, and we predicted what our survival rates would be. Now, first of all, this isn't perfect, and there are going to be times where we'll probably miss the mark a bit, but it's better and it's more proactive than we've ever been. And if we look at the manti, we're predicting really high survival on the manti this year, and we've seen it before. You know, in real life collars on the unit in 2016-17, we saw 88% survival. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities. And just as the previous year, we had 75% fawn survival in 17-18, we're predicting that again this year. So when we take all that data into consideration, when we look at fawns coming into the system, as well as adult doe survival, number of deer on the landscape, then we can predict what our buck-doe ratios will be after the fact. So when we look at the manti, with high success, right? So if we look at our highest success year on the manti, that'd be 32 right there, 32%. So under the highest success we had on the manti over the last 5 years, we'd come in right there in the sweet spot of our buck-doe ratio. With average success, we're even a little bit above that. And then if we were to come in under our low success scenario, we'd be quite a bit out of that. And so there's no way managing on buck-doe ratios that we can justify a cut on the manti. Now, the criticism that we get, or the question we get, well, then why are we cutting permits on units that are over objective? And if you allow me, I'll show you one more example really quick, just to show you how this comes in. Let's look at the ochre Stansberries. You look at the percent population drop. Let's blow this up again. You look at the drop on the ochre Stansberries. You know, a year ago we were modeling. That's December of 2017 to December of 2018. We're modeling 13,600 deer. And then if we look back on last year, that number dropped quite a bit, down to 9,900 deer. Now, the reason being is because our adult survival and fawn survival were so low, right? When you have those survival rates, and these are real life collars on the unit, when they're that low, you end up reducing the population. Now, even though our buck-doe ratio is coming in within the objective and the 3-year average being above the objective, if we hunted that population at this same rate, and I guess I need to point out one more thing, and that is this number right here, this 39.4. This is the fawn-doe ratio. And this is the one that a lot of times really drives these general season units, fawn-doe ratio and fawn survival, because these are your yearling bucks. These are the bucks coming into the system. These are the bucks that are 6 months old when they're collared, or these are the animals that are 6 months old when they're collared up to 18 months old when they're harvested. And again, I mentioned before, this number, it's better when it's around 60. That's what we like to see. So that number is quite a bit below, 39.4. And then fawn survival on the Stansberries hasn't been great. We're predicting 45% survival, and tracking previous years, we will probably come in somewhere close to that. Adult survival, 85%, that's a good number. But with that low fawn survival, we just don't have as many bucks in the landscape. So recommending a cut, which we are, of 1,200 permits, from 3,200 to 2,000. And then let's look at what that means on the landscape. It means that under low success, which when you have fewer deer on the landscape, we know that we'll probably end up in the low success category. We'll come in at the very bottom of the buck-doe ratio that we're anticipating. Now, again, this isn't perfect. It's a lot better than anything we've done before. And it's more proactive and it's more predictive. And every year we'll look at these and we'll be able to readjust. And that's the great thing about the Utah system, is that we can adjust this annually. So those are the types of data that we used on general season permits this year. And that's the reason why we can't recommend a cut on the manti. So with that, we'll exit out of presenting. And Ken, does that clear up your question? And Rusty, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, Kobe, it does. I guess with this new system, it's just going to take a little bit to understand it and get used to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Other questions?
Hey, Brock, I have a question. This is Josh Leonard. Covey, you a couple of these units are seeing some pretty drastic decreases. Obviously, the cash and a few others. I guess my question is, do you anticipate as drastic of increases when these numbers improve? It seems like some of these units are going to see a lot fewer hunters afield, and I just want to make sure that when those numbers rise, that the cuts, that the trade-off is as equal measure.
It needs to be, and I'll be honest with you, the division is going to come with those recommendations. Absolutely, Josh. We will come, when we have the deer, we will come with drastic increases, and we'll need support at the RACs and the board to get those increases through. But the only way that we can manage mule deer like this and make these drastic cuts is by having the assurity that when we come back and say, no, things are good, we've got great fondo ratios, we're going to have great survival, we need the support to have those drastic increases as well. So the answer is yes, we intend to recommend that way.
Thanks, Covey. That's encouraging to hear.
Other questions for Covey?
I have another question, Mike Christensen. On the late season muzzleloader tags on general season units, why is there such a drastic difference between some units and other units on the percentage or the permit allocation? Like on the Wasatch, it's the full 0.5% or 40 tags. And on some of these other units, it's the minimum of 5 permits. And it just seems very, well, I'll let you answer.
Mike, that is a really good question. And I'm glad you brought it up, because there is nothing consistent about the way those were recommended. This is one of the things that when the Mule Deer Committee wrote this, we recommended to leave those at 0.5% all the time and just leave that language in the plan. Have 5 or 0.5%, whichever were greater, because we do have some units, the 1,000 Lakes, for example, that would never hit 5. So, but when we took this through the board, there was a sentiment that they wanted local biologists to really have a lot of input on this. After the board meeting, we sat down, we got together, and we tried to come up with some kind of consensus as to how we would recommend these, under what criteria we would recommend and how. And I'll be honest with you, there's just a lot of internal different philosophies and feelings among biologists on this. And this is one where I took what the board said to heart and I left it in the hands of the biologists. And so you'll see biologists that felt like they were more liberal with the permit recommendation and biologists that were more reserved. And some of that had to do with where they were at their buck-doe ratio, obviously, but some of that had to do with just with local sentiment. These being limited entry tags, limited entry permits, this is really a social issue. Although I can understand why it might not seem fair, because they weren't distributed equitably or fair.
Thank you, Covey. Any other questions?
This is Ben. I've got another question. Covey, I'm looking at the numbers on the 1,000 Lakes, and I see we're looking for a permit cut of 50 tags there. And we had a pretty drastic drop in the buck to doe ratio for 2019. I'm assuming that's where the tag cut is coming in. With that unit, though, it makes me wonder if that buck to doe ratio is maybe an anomaly. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can try, Ben. 1,000 Lakes is not a great general season unit. We need to fix that, and we're working on it. the southern region and the biologists down there know that it doesn't work well as a general season unit, and they're looking at other strategies. And you should see that unit plan coming back before the RACs and the board this fall. Now, that's not a great answer, but the truth is that buck-to ratio bounces all the time, high to low. It's a small unit. It was at one time limited entry, got put back in the general season system, but it just doesn't fit well. And that you nailed the rationale for the permit reduction, but could it be an anomaly? Maybe, yeah. It's a difficult unit to manage. It doesn't fit the robust general season units that we're used to managing. But we are going to work to change that.
Sure. So with that, how's the rest of the data looking on that unit? The fawn production, the fawn survival, the adult survival, and so forth.
Covey, you must be on mute.
Yeah, I'm still on mute. I need to pull some of that up, Ben. I don't know if I have that in front of me right now, but I can pull that up and get back to you in just a second. Or Kent, do you have any of that right in front of you as far as fawn-to ratios? As far as survival goes for the 1,000 lakes, we use a representative unit, which is the Monroe. Plateau 1,000 Lakes doesn't have any colors on it specifically.
Yeah, this is Kent.
Okay.
Ben, the fawn doe on there was 62, but again, that's based on a pretty small sample size. And I think a large part of the justification goes back to, if you look at all the surrounding units, we saw decreases on most of them and poor performance from a population standpoint. So we would probably expect that on 1,000 Lakes, even though we just don't have the quality of data that we have on other units.
Okay, thank you. And just while I've got the mic real quick, big applause to Kent and Covey for this data modeling and spreadsheet they've put together. They showed this to me last week and went into it pretty in deep with me, and it's awesome. We've got more data and information now than we've ever had, and so big applause to you guys. And from what Covey tells me, Kent's the guy that's driving that, so big applause to Kent. It's really awesome. I love the way you guys are making your recommendations with all the data now.
Thanks, Ben.
Questions from the RAC?
With that drastic cut on the 1,000 Lakes, what's the lifetime license holder situation with how many permits they take out of that pool before it goes into the general draw?
Oh no, where's Lindy? I don't know if she's on tonight. I don't think she is. Mike, I know they take a lot of those permits. I'm not sure how many, but I know they take a lot of those permits.
Any other questions? Okay, let's hear comments or discussion among the RAC.
Brock, I'll go ahead and start. Or sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ben. Ben first, and then we'll go to Mike.
Okay, Ben Louder. Yeah, so just a couple of thoughts. And I got into this a little bit in the question period. The bison on the Henrys, that archery only hunt, the archery only hunter's choice hunt, it's the only hunt right now, or with these recommendations, it's the only hunt that has only one tag in the resident pool, and that eliminates the potential for a bonus point tag there. I really think that would be a lot better off with one more tag, just so we can still give a tag to the highest bonus point pool on that hunt. So I'd like to see us make that change. Covey mentioned that there's no biological issue with that. And then coming back to the 1,000 Lakes, that's a big cut on this unit, and it's just kind of a weird unit where I'm struggling to decide if we really need the cut on that unit or not. All the rest of the units where there's cuts recommended, looking at the data, I think it all makes sense. But that one I'm struggling with a little bit. Outside of that, looking through some of SFW's recommendations, I'd like to go through some of the things that some of their thoughts on the sheep tags. I know they're looking for an increase on the Zion, or not an increase, but status quo on the Zion, and I agree with them on that one. And then they're looking for some cuts on some of the other units from the recommendations. I don't know that I can get behind them on all other cuts, but I do like the idea of keeping that Zion status quo. So aside from that, I think some pretty solid recommendations from the DWR this year.
Thank you, Ben. Mike, go ahead.
I would have one question pertaining to Ben's asking of the Buffalo permit, addition of that permit. Are those permits given on a percentage basis per weapon type, or is that more of just a management strategy?
That's a good question, Ben. It's more of a management strategy. Yeah.
Okay. And then my other comment pertains to the Nebo elk herd. In 2010, that herd gave 144 limited entry elk permits. Now that may or may not have been too many at the time, but now we're recommending 42 limited entry elk permits 10 years later. And that average age over that time, because they've been cut every year since 2010, and the average age over that time has never increased. And we talk about point creep all the time. How can we help with point creep? Well, it certainly doesn't help point creep to cut 100 tags out of a unit and not see any benefit from that cut. And we've already heard that the division is thinking of revisiting that unit. They are aware that it's not managed properly. Well, it's managed properly, but the age objective isn't a proper age objective. And so, when it comes to the time to make motions, I would like to have the RAC consider to leave those permits at the 2019 level, and then address it next year. We're cutting 5 permits, which is more than 10% out of a unit that just can't handle the age objective that it's been put under.
Thank you, Mike. So that everybody knows, I'm keeping track of the comments, and we will come back and I'll bring these points up one at a time to see if anybody wants to make a motion on any of the things we've been discussing. Other comments?
Yes, Ken Strong here. I noticed that we're looking at on the Newfoundland to have a U sheep hunt. Possibility of transplanting those sheep somewhere else instead of killing them off. We're always trying to get more sheep, so.
Is that a question?
I think that's a question for you, Kobe.
I'd love to address that, but I'd love it if we did it during the Antlerless presentation or during the next presentation.
That's a great comment. Other comments?
Hey, Brock, this is Eric.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, and this is back to Ben's comment on the Zion and with the sportsman for fishing wildlife, leaving the Zion sheep the same. Is that one that, as far as the division, is the division concerned about the movie that's in there? Is that part of the reason of watching the numbers there and making those adjustments, or is it something else?
Eric, That's a really good question. We're always concerned whenever we get that in a population, obviously, but when you do have that in a population, there's a couple different strategies you can employ. One is to reduce densities and reduce RAM-U ratios. And the other one is biologists. Sometimes we try to hold on too tight. The truth is that recommendation has less to do with disease and more to do with in the statewide management plan, we agreed to manage some units for more quality and some units for more liberally. And we didn't identify those units. We left it up to an internal decision. So there's quite a broad range of where we could recommend permits. Based on the last flight, there were fewer RAMs in the landscape, but last year's permit numbers are still within the plan, or they're not outside of the plan. The cut is recommended to have more quality RAMs in the landscape, and that's the rationale. Jace, are you on here as well?
Yeah, I'm here, Kobe.
Would you?
I don't think my
anything to
camera's
that,
working,
Jace?
but I can definitely talk at least.
I'm glad your camera's not working, Jace.
Me too.
Would you add anything to that?
No, I think that it's just important to note that both last year's, whether we stayed status quo or that we did the recommended decrease, both are within the guidelines of the plan. And just like Kobe said, it's just based on the opinion of the biologist, what he's seeing, the flight we've done, communicating with sportsmen and guides down there. We'd like to try to manage for older age RAMs in the unit, and that's the reason for the recommended decrease.
Other comments?
Mike Christensen, on those lines, is that herd susceptible to disease? That where we could, if we manage for older rams, we could just let them die on the landscape?
The disease questions are always really hard to answer, Mike. The answer is they have mycoplasma now. We always hope they don't get some other strain or some other, hope they don't get a pastorella or hope they don't get something else that would add to that and make things worse. But I think the truth is that there's always potential for sheep to die. And now they have mycoplasma, the potential of something else happening is probably higher. Again, I'd defer to Jace to see if I missed anything there as the statewide sheep biologist.
No, Mike, it's a good question, a good comment. And really the fact of the matter is all of our bighorn herds are susceptible. Nothing is immune and nothing is, 100% safe. So yeah, there's always potential that they pick up a pathogen that causes a respiratory disease event, and then we lose a lot of animals. That's always a possibility. And the fact that they do have more pathogens in the system now than they did, say, 2 years ago, does increase the risk. It's just trying to find the balancing act. Every herd is susceptible. This one so far we have not had deaths related to respiratory disease. And so it's just one unit where we wanted to have some old rams. There's definitely risk, and yes, having older rams probably does increase that. It's just balancing, trying to figure, is it worth it or is it not? But you're spot on your comment.
Jace, I have one question for you while you're there, and that is on the Zion unit. I was under the understanding that a few tags each of the last few years have been turned in at the last minute, so we aren't even harvesting the animals. So there should be more animals there available than what's been in the past. Is that not true?
No, it's not that common. There have been tags turned back last minute, last few years. That mean that there were some rams that weren't harvested. The people that did keep their tags have almost always harvested. I think it's always been 100% harvest rate for those who get the tags. But yeah, that's a true statement.
This is Josh Leonard. Just to follow up on that question, what were the units where those tags were harvested? I mean, we've heard these anecdotal stories about certain bad actors doing it repeatedly. Can you speak to which units those were? Was it the Zion or which ones?
I don't have that on me. This is Jace. I don't know if Lindy would probably have that. I don't know if that's something that she could pull together quickly or not, but I couldn't speak to exactly which units and every time that it's happened.
Josh, I don't think Lindy's on the call right now, but if you wanted to get with her after, we could go over. And the rule change should fix that, so it shouldn't happen moving forward.
Thank you, Covey. Other comments from the RAC?
This is Ben. I'd like to just make a follow-up comment on the Zion sheep. So we've been saying for years you can't stockpile bucks, and you got to kill them when you have them. And I think I'd apply that adage to the Zion sheep, especially where they're now more susceptible because they have mycoplasma. So, my opinion, let's give that opportunity when we can.
Thank you, Ben. Other comments? I'd like to make one while we're here. I want to go back to the late season limited entry hunt. My comment is, I had the pleasure of serving on the mule deer committee and I really enjoyed it. And we discussed this late season hunt at length. Personally, I was against it. But I got outvoted by the committee and I was okay with that. I think several members of the committee are on the Central Region RAC, maybe 3 or 4 of us. But I don't like, and I don't think the committee liked, that there was so much flexibility in how many tags among units, because nobody wants those tags taken out of their unit if they're not going to be taken out of everybody else's unit. Everybody wants the best hunt in their own backyard. And the committee voted, all the stakeholders in the room voted 21-2 to set that at a standard, at a fixed rate, so that people couldn't say, not in my backyard, we're not going to have this in my backyard. And so 21 of the 23 stakeholders in the room agreed that you couldn't have 5 tags on a unit and 40 tags on another unit when the objective was the same. So my opinion is, I don't care what we do, but we should treat the units the same so that we just don't have the not in my backyard stuff going on.
This is Mike Christensen, and I agree wholeheartedly. I was on the prior mule deer committee, not on the last one, when this came, when this change came out. I was totally against it. And it's hard to see the Wasatch have 40 tags, late season tags put on it, while another unit that has more bucks on it has 5 tags. Any sense to me?
This is Josh Leonard again. I'd like to weigh in as well. I was on this mule deer committee, and the committee came to a consensus in a way that I haven't seen with a group of sportsmen of any interaction I've ever been a part of. And to see those recommendations get changed at the last minute at the wildlife board felt like the entire process got hijacked. And so I would agree with Brock and Mike in saying that if it's going to be applied, it has to be applied statewide, and allowing 1 or 2 biologists to set these numbers doesn't seem like it fits with state wildlife management on a holistic level. And it seems to really compromise the integrity of the system.
Thank you, Josh. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, Ben Louder also served on that committee, and I would echo and support everything you guys just said. And I would not be opposed to, and I might even encourage a motion tonight to set those tags at just 0.5% across the board, all units. I don't think that would be a bad thing.
Thank you, Ben. I have that on my list of things when it comes time for motions. Any other comments or discussion regarding the recommendations for bucks bulls once in a lifetime?
Brock, Ben again. I've got one more I'd like to bring up. I forgot to bring this one up earlier. Looking at the numbers and again back to SFWs, the item 8 on there is the cash deer, and maybe Kobe or Kent or somebody could speak to this. Their comments are that they were in full support of the DWR recommendations until just recently, just this last week, and that we've been losing fawns at an alarming rate. Covey, can you speak to that and whether or not that's been taken into account in the current recommendations, or if we need to factor that in, if we need to deviate here on that?
Ben, yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been the last couple of weeks. We've had a lot of fawns drop on the cache. We were 48% fawn survival right now of the collared fawns. You know, we had 21 collared fawns on the cache, and so we've lost more than we thought, and we anticipated that survival would be higher. When the cache fawns came in this year, they were fatter than they were the previous year. Obviously, when we had it was a devastating winter in 2019. They were on average 3 pounds heavier, and it looked like that was going to be enough for the winter that we had, but we may have missed the mark a little bit on that one. We projected higher survival when we looked at it, and a bit more of a cut there may be appropriate to get us to where we need to be and to manage to the buck-to ratio.
So Kobe, I love what we've been doing with using real data. What should that cut be?
We crunched the numbers, Brock, and if we and again, I want to stress this: these units they're driven a lot by these fawns coming into the system, and I also want to stress that if we're going to do this, if we're going to make these big cuts, then we also, I hope the RAC can be supportive when the division comes and says we're going to make big increases. But if we were to recommend a number, it'd be 800 more.
A reduction of 800 more tags for a total of 1,600 reduction. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, Brock.
Any other I have one other comment. So I see we have a drastic reduction on the Fillmore. And I actually like that if because we're using real data, but I've tried to crunch the numbers, and the only way I can come up with that reduction is if we only have 50% fawn survival, but all the surrounding units are much higher than 50%. What number of fawn survival did you guys use to come up with that drastic reduction on the Fillmore? Do you know that, Covey?
We used 65% on survival in the film when we came up with that number.
And what unit was that based on, 65?
Sorry, I can hear somebody else talking in the background. The Fillmore is based on the Monroe, obviously, but understanding that these units are different, we left some of this to the biologists because we don't have, we use proximate collars. We cannot physically collar every deer on every unit. It's impossible. As you know, Brock and others, this takes a lot of time. So it's based on the Monroe, but it's also based on local observations from the district biologist as well.
Perfect. I do support how you're doing things. I think this is great that we're using real-time data to try to come up with recommendations. Other comments or discussion? Or are we ready for motions? I hear nothing. So I'm going to start with my list, and if somebody wants to make a motion,
I'll make a motion, Brock. Ken
okay.
Strong.
Go ahead, Ken.
We just got done talking about the cache general deer hunt and how Covey said it wouldn't hurt to increase. So I would like to make a motion that we increase another 800 to 1,600 permits on the deer on the cache unit.
So Ken is making a motion to increase or to decrease the number of tags allocated to the cache by another 800 for a total decrease of 1,600. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that. Mike Christensen.
Brock, can you restate the motion?
Brock, you're muted.
The motion would be, thanks, Covey. The motion would be to decrease the cache tags by an additional 800 tags. I don't have the numbers up right in front of me.
That puts it at 5,000.
So that's right. It decreases from 5,800 to 5,000 tags. And that motion was seconded. Is there any discussion on this motion?
So to clarify, that's 800 in addition to the current decrease.
That's correct. Last year was 6,600. The initial recommendation was to decrease it to 5,800. And Ken just made the motion to decrease it an additional 800 to 5,000.
Brock, this is Ben. Just brief comment here. I think probably a majority of our RAC members are in agreement with me on this. If not, speak up and tell me otherwise. But I think we typically we don't like to make these cuts, right? We don't want to be making these cuts. But I think on this unit and in this scenario, it warrants the cut. And for that reason, I'm in support of this. And as has been asked by the DWR and Covey, when things come around in a few years, because things typically go up and down, that we support these drastic increases when they're warranted as well. So.
Thank you, Ben.
And Mike Christensen, I just say that I seconded that recommendation based on Covey's biological input.
Thank you, Mike. Any other comments on this? Okay, I'm going to call for a vote. And again, I have to do a roll call by name. So please be prepared.
Hey,
AJ.
Brock.
Oh,
Hey, Brock, before you get started, I just want to mention Commissioner Lund popped in at the beginning of this discussion. So he's now here and hopefully he can hear us. Steve, can you hear us okay?
I can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's include him on this roll call count as well, please.
Okay. Okay, AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Christine Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Lenart.
No.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker. Not here. Mike.
Yes.
Oh, Luke, you're here. Okay, excellent. Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
It looks like that passes 9-1. Okay, the next item on the that I'd like to address is Ben brought up the point of increasing the number of archery bison resident tags from 1 to 2. I believe there are about 100 tags on that. Does anybody want to make a motion on that discussion item?
Brock, I'll make that motion. I move that we increase the tags on the Henry Mountains Bison archery only hunter's choice hunt to 3 tags. That's an increase of 1.
So Ben said 3. I believe that's 1 non-resident, and it'll be 2 resident tags, 1 to go to max points, 1 random.
This is Ken Strong.
That's cool.
Okay, Ken seconds. I'm writing this down, so I'm just delaying just a second. Okay, there's been a motion and a second to increase the number of archery tags to 3. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call. AJ Maurer,
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
Christine Schmitz,
Yes.
Danny Potts,
Yeah.
Eric Reed,
Yes.
Josh Lenart,
Yes.
Ken Strong,
Yes.
Luke Decker,
Yes.
Mike Christensen,
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. The next thing I have on my list is all of the sheep recommendations from SFW that I believe Ben brought up. Let's start with the Zion sheep, and then we can talk about any. Does anybody want to make a motion regarding the Zion sheep?
Brock, Ben here. I'll make that motion that we move that we keep tag same numbers as 2019.
Ken Strong here. I'll second that.
Is
Okay,
that
there's been go ahead, Mike.
is that specifically for the Zion unit, or are we discussing others?
Let's do the Zion first, and then we'll discuss the other ones.
Yes, my motion was specifically to the Zion.
Any discussion? Okay, the motion is to keep the tag numbers on the Zion the same as they were in 2019. AJ Maurer,
Yes.
Ben Louder,
Yes.
Christine Schmitz,
Yes.
Danny Potts,
Yeah.
Eric Reed,
Yes.
Josh Lenart,
Yes.
Ken Strong,
Yes.
Luke Decker,
Yes.
Mike Christensen. Mike.
Yes.
Okay. Steve Lund.
Yes.
I want to make sure that Jake Still nor Scott Jensen have shown up. Okay, that passes unanimously. Does anybody want to make a recommendation on the other sheep units? One of the conversations was about, well, Kobe wanted to talk about the U-hunt on the Newfoundland and the Antlerless. So let's not do that one, but any of the other sheep recommendations.
Yeah, this is Ken Strong here. I'm a little concerned about the Fillmore Oak Creek because even though we have 70 rams there, they're all young, and we're raising it to 14 instead of 10. So I would like to propose that we leave it at 10 for this year, because I don't think there's going to be 400s that are going to be really happy with the rams as young as they are. So I would propose that I would make a motion that we drop it back to what it was last year at 10.
Okay, so Ken has made a motion to keep the ram number on the Oak Creek at 10. Is there a second? Hearing none, the motion dies. Other motions relative to sheep.
This has been, that was the Fillmore Oak Creek unit, right?
That's correct.
So the increase, I'm just looking at the increase,
10 to 14.
10 to 14. I'd be willing to make a motion to split the difference on that and go 12.
Okay, Ben has made a motion to split the difference and go to 12 instead of 14.
Ken Strong here. I'll second that.
Okay, Ken is seconded.
Hey, Brock, this is Jace. I hate to jump in. I don't have the recommendations or the comments from SFW, but we only gave 4 permits on the Oak Creek last year. We didn't give 10. We only had 4 permits on the Oak Creek last year, and it was in 1 hunt.
Okay, and this year you've gone to 14, Jace?
14 is the recommendation.
And Ken, so we have this motion on to go to 12. It might be amended based on that information. Jace, what is the age structure? Ken said that they're really young rams. Is that true, or are there 14 mature rams?
So we flew it in November of 2019. It's the most recent survey, and the increase in the number of rams we counted was the reason for the recommended increase in permits. On that flight, we counted 70 rams, and 38 of them were class 3 and 4 rams. Class 3 and 4 basically means a ram that's 6 years or older. So 70 total rams, 38 were 6 years or older.
Excellent. So I guess we're in a discussion phase on this motion. I would not be in favor of this if there's 38 class 3 or class 4 rams on that unit.
This is Mike Christensen, and I tend to agree with you, Brock. I think for us to shoot from the hip with permit numbers that we are not visually seeing the rams, we have to rely on the biologist, and I support Jace with his 14 tag recommendation.
Brock, can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Kobe.
Based on those numbers and according to the plan, we could have recommended 22 permits. And the Oak Creek, again, when we look at units with risk, the Oak Creek's a unit where we really have to be careful and diligent and manage those RAM-BU ratios, or else we run the risk of losing all the sheep. And we saw a die-off on the Stansberries when we hit high RAM-to-U ratios, and I keep hoping that we've learned our lesson. The more rams you have on a unit, the more of a chance you have for those rams to wander. And so that's some of the rationale behind that. Now, we didn't go as aggressive as we could have. We could have gone up to 22 with that recommendation, and we took it incrementally. But that's the rationale for 14.
Thank you, Kobe. So what were you just saying, that there's sheep in relatively close proximity, and we don't want high rams running off the unit, or we're going to get disease? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, Brock.
Other discussion
Brock,
on the motion?
Yeah, so in light of, well, first, I don't think I received a second on this motion.
Ken seconded.
Oh, did he? Okay. Given the information that we've just received, I'd like to withdraw that motion.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Does anybody want to make a motion on sheep?
I'll make a motion, Brock. This is Josh Leonard. I think the last 5 minutes of explanation from the division has been really enlightful and for me for addressing this. And I'd like to make a motion that we accept the rest of the sheep recommendations as presented by the division.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the rest of the sheep recommendations as presented. Is there a second?
This is Chris. I second it.
That motion is seconded by Chris Schmitz. Discussion. Hearing none, I'll roll call. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Lauder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Joshua Lenart. Josh.
Sorry. Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. The next thing that I have on my list is the Nebo elk herd moving from 110 to 42 permits without any shift in the age structure. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll take a stab at it, Mike Christensen. Based on the over a decade's worth of data, I recommend, and based on the fact that the division is most likely going to revisit this unit this year, I'd like to recommend that we keep the Nebo limited entry elk permit numbers at the 2019 level of 47.
I'm writing this down. Did you second that, Ben?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to keep the limited entry elk tag numbers the same as last year at 47 tags. Any discussion on this motion?
This is Luke, really quick.
Okay, go ahead, Luke.
I just had a question for Cody there. Is this what's the overall health of the herd? Is it the recruitment and then just the health of the herd itself?
I'm gonna ask Rusty to take that as the district biologist.
Okay, Rusty.
Yeah, that's a great question. The overall health is good. The fire's been good, opening up some nutrition and habitat. We just flew the unit. There's plenty of bulls. There's plenty of mature bulls. So biologically, a recommendation like that wouldn't hurt anything.
Thank you, Rusty. Other discussion?
I'm wondering if we need to, or if it would be a good idea to either include in the motion or add another motion to ask the wildlife board to address the objective on this unit. And I agree 100% with Mike on this. We raised that objective. We've cut a lot of opportunity and made no difference. And I'd like to see us get that opportunity back. So
Okay.
I don't know if it's I don't know if you got the question too. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I added it to my list. Let's address that separately from this, if everybody's okay with that.
Great, thanks.
Any more discussion? Okay, roll call vote. The motion is to keep the limited entry elk tag numbers the same as last year at 47, rather than reducing the tag numbers because there has not been a shift over the last several years in age structure. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
No.
Danny Potts.
Yeah, but only because, anyway.
Yes.
Jake Steele. Not here. Joshua Leonard.
Yes, I think it's a great motion, Mike.
Ken Strong. Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes 9-1. The next topic I have on my list is the late season limited entry muzzleloader tags. Does anybody want to address this?
If nobody else does, I will. That said, Brock, I know you're passionate about this, and if you wanted to take this and address it in the form of a motion, I'd support you on that.
I'm willing to do it, but I don't know if it's customary that the chair makes motions, so if somebody else wants to make the motion, if not,
No,
I'll do it.
Yeah, but you don't have to make a motion. You just have to tell us what will work, and we'll work around it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and make the motion. I move that we recommend late season limited entry muzzleloader tags at 0.5% on all units, except for, minimum of 5 for those units that won't get to 5 with 0.5% and 0.5% on the rest of them.
Ken Strong here, and I agree with what Ben's just said, and I will second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Ben and a second by Ken that we treat all the units the same, that we have either 5 tags or 0.5%, whichever is greater.
Brock, this is Josh Leonard. Before you call a vote, a point of discussion, just to clarify the motion, you might just say to go with the Mule Deer Committee's initial recommendation.
Okay, is that a friendly amendment that everybody agrees on? Hearing no objection. Go ahead.
I would use that just as clarification. Maybe this is our motion because it reflects what the Mule Deer Committee agreed upon.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that because that Mule Deer Committee recommendation was obviously left on the side of the road and died. But it does give us a basis for why we're doing it. And I would third this recommendation.
Okay, Mike, other discussion?
Yeah, I like Ben's rewording of it as well. I think the motion is well said.
Okay, other discussion? I'm writing this down, so I'm going slow. Okay, AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimous. We've already addressed the cashier. The only other thing I have on my list is the age objective on the NEBO. If somebody wants to recommend that we ask that to be addressed before the Mule Deer plan.
I'll take a stab at that. I recommend that I move that the NEBO limited entry elk herd be managed under the 5.5 to 6 year old age objective. Recommend to the board to manage that at that rate.
Mike, can I ask for some clarification? Just because we have several of these units that we need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually don't get involved in motions, but would it be okay to expand that and ask the division to look at those units that are underperforming and that haven't met the expectations with the previous elk committee?
Yeah, I rescind my motion, and Covey, along those lines, really quick, as a point of discussion, when will the elk committee be reconvened?
That's a 7-year plan. It was written in 2015, so it'd be 2 more years. And so And so you wouldn't have the next plan in place almost for 3 years probably. So anyway, yeah, but I'm not opposed to looking at having a mid-plan review.
What are the other units that would fall under that?
There's a few of them, but the Deep Creeks is one off the top of my head. The Deep Creeks just doesn't work. The Ochre Stansberries also isn't performing the way that it should. And there's a few other units around the state that, as we look at it in 5 years, we just aren't trending towards and aren't making progress towards that age objective. And we just keep cutting and taking away public opportunity. And we have bulls there. But depending upon where they are and how neighboring units are managed and other things, we're just not hitting it.
All right, I'll take another stab at it. I move that we recommend to the Wildlife Board to adjust the Nebo elk unit to 5.5 to 6 year old age objective and allow the division to visit other units which are underperforming.
So the motion Mike made is to ask the Wildlife Board to look at the Nebo, to adjust the Nebo limited entry unit to 5.5 to 6.5, and look at other elk units that are chronically underperforming. Is that
I'll
correct?
second that.
Okay. Excellent. Mike, go back and is that consistent?
You said 5.5 to 6.5. Maybe I misspoke, but it would be 5.5 to 6.
Okay. Same as the mantis, 5.5 to 6.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll still second that. This is Eric.
Hey, Eric Reed seconded it. Discussion on this topic. Hearing none, I'll do a roll call. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. That's all I have on my list. Does anybody want to bring up something or want to make a recommendation to accept the remainder?
Ben Louder, move to accept the remainder of the division's recommendations as presented.
Ken Strong, I'll second that.
Okay, Ben Louder made a motion, Ken seconded, accept the remainder of the Bucks, Bulls, and once in a lifetime recommendations. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll roll call. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
That ends that agenda item. I've had a couple of requests by text that we take a couple minute break. So right now I have at 7:40. Let's take a few minute break and reconvene at 7:45. Okay, I have 7:45. Looks like most people are getting back into their seats. Another few seconds and we'll start again. Welcome back, everybody. The next item on the agenda is the Antlerless permit recommendations for 2020. Covey presented on this online. Let's turn the time over to Jason Vernon for a summary of public comments.
All right, just a quick summary of the comments that were put together, received for the Antlerless recommendations. We had 58% of the respondents supporting the proposal, 34% were neutral on the proposal, and about 8% were opposed to the proposal. As Brock mentioned initially, there weren't a lot of comments associated with or a lot of written comments associated with the support or neutral or an opposed. So we would look for some of those. I think there's still some folks out there looking at those recommendations that are against antlerless hunts altogether, but for the most part, they were supportive or neutral on these antlerless recommendations for 2020.
Thank you, Jason. Questions for Covey from the RAC? Covey, I have one. Is Covey there?
I'm here, Brock.
So I've already talked to you about this, but I just want to get it on the record so that everybody understands. As I went through the recommendation, the one thing that I was concerned about is there was a 15% reduction of tags on public land and only a 6% reduction of tags on private land. Can you explain why that is the case?
So now, Brock, just to be clear, you're speaking as to the private lands only out tags versus the public draw permits. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So part of that is philosophy. And if you remember back to the presentation, even though we offer, I believe it's 9,000 of those private lands only permits, we don't sell that many. In fact, let me just bring that up really quickly and just show you. Of the private lands only permits last year,
3,700 or something.
3,813 permits are the number that we sold. We harvested 1,420 elk for a 37% success rate. And the reason why, and that adds up over different units, is because we want those permits to be there for private landowners when they have problems to be able to call and solve their own problem. And we have some private landowners that have caught on to this and are using it. And we have others that haven't caught onto this yet. So the reason for the high recommendation of permits is so that we don't run out. In areas where we have high conflict, we don't want to run out of these permits and not be able to solve that conflict. But overall, elk in the state, we saw the populations dip a bit, probably due to poor calf production. Unlike deer, they don't. The adults don't tend to be as susceptible to drought and harsh winters and those things, but it appears that the cow-calf ratio, I think, that elk dipped a little bit this last year, and it's probably because of that calf crop. So even though the reduction doesn't look fair, consistent, Brock, it is more than that.
Perfect. I understood that. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood. Other questions for Covey? Ken, maybe this is the time for you to ask him about the U hunt.
Yeah, this Ken Strong. Covey, I just curious why. I know there's a lot of people that want to kill a ewe ram or a ewe sheep, but why don't we transplant those? As expensive as they are to buy, why don't we transplant them instead of killing them? Thank you.
Perfect, Ken. I'm going to answer that question, and then Jason's here again as well. If I missed something, I'd appreciate it if he'd follow up. But The reason why is because that U hunt in that area, especially the Newfies, it's hard to catch on. That's one reason. It's restricted airspace, and it doesn't always line up to where we can get out there. And we're starting to hit densities to where we could start to impact that population. We don't want to do that. We don't want to negatively impact that population because we can't get a ship out there or aren't allowed to enter the restricted airspace to catch at that time. And that's just one reason. There are other reasons. Some of the other reasons are that there is always risk associated with the transplant. Anytime we move sheep, the more we move sheep, the more we move sheep and collar sheep, we've started to learn that these sheep sometimes, it's like you just stuck a bunch of popcorn in the microwave. And when you move them, they go all different places. Whereas the resident sheep over time start to hang close to the sheep habitat, don't run off as much. These new transplants just move like popcorn. And so looking at the risk of moving those Californias to other California herds around the state and seeing that our other California herds are doing well, it's a risk that we'd rather just hold off on for now and not put those Californias and put those other herds at risk. Because if you have one of those sheep leave that you transplant and head out across and come into contact with disease and then bring it back to that entire herd, you could lose the entire herd. So that's another reason. And the final reason, and this is just pure honesty, our sheep program is busy. We are busy. We are moving sheep where we can, where we need to. We are augmenting populations. We are looking to get some genetic diversity in different populations. We're looking to get disease profiles and manage these herds better. And so every transplant we do takes time away from something else. And so we've decided that the best use of our resources on the Newfies probably isn't to set up transplants to move those sheep off. It's to harvest those animals, manage that population, and focus our efforts in other places. Jace, do you have anything to add to that?
No, nothing to add, Colby. Just so that when Colby's talking about California bighorn herds, we only have 3. It's the Newfies, which we're talking about trying to manage so that they don't reach or exceed their our objective, population objective. We're at over 300 animals. We'll probably be at the objective very soon, next couple of years. The other 2 herds are the Oak Creeks, which is nearing its population objective as well, so it's not suitable to receive animals, and the Stansberries, which is below the objective, but we've done 4 transplants into that unit in the last 2 years. So we've been real aggressive there, and like Colby has said, every single one of those transplants has involved in a risk as far as we move animals to the Stansberries, and every single one of those, some of those animals have left the mountain or tried to leave or required more work for us. So it's definitely a risk. And then I think, like Colby said, the biggest thing is time-wise. We could move sheep from the Newfies, but we feel like with all the other things that we have going on, opportunities in bighorn sheep management, that there's better uses of our time. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Jason. Colby, other questions from the RAC for Colby?
I have a question.
Yeah, Ben here.
Ben first, and then Mike.
Yeah, all right, thanks. Regarding though, and maybe this is a question for Jace or Colby, whoever's most appropriate, concerning that herd out on the Newfies. I'm assuming since they're below population objective that they're like in a growth mode right now, which we know is great for producing more animals. If we remove some of these ewes, is that going to help keep them in a growth mode for a longer period of time, or potentially if we continue to do this perpetually?
Jace, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, Ben. So the population objective on the Newfies is 350 animals. If we reach that objective, the density out on the Newfies will be one of the higher densities that we have in the state, which is fine. It's a good number that we want to get to. If that number 350 is not the carrying capacity of the Newfies, it's not like if we get to 350, we're going to be just pushing the envelope, having the maximum number of animals out there. And we're doing that on purpose for the reason that you just mentioned. We don't want to create a stagnant situation with unhealthy animals because we have too many. So 350 will be fine, but we are reaching that quickly, like you're saying. That herd has been growing. We've been able to do a number of translocations off of there, and so it's been growing. And so yeah, I think that if we can keep it at or just below that 350 number, that we'll be in the best situation with the healthiest herd, like you're talking about.
This is Steve. I have a question for Jace.
Steve, wait just a minute. Let Mike do his, and then we'll go to you if that's okay.
You bet.
Oh, my question's more social than biological, but so does the division anticipate there to be more U tags? Is this going to be an often occurrence, or is this kind of a one-off every few years?
Are you speaking for this specific unit, Mike, or are you speaking for statewide?
I guess I would speak statewide. The reason behind my question is if it's just 10 animals here and 5 there every so often, I just wonder if the use of points and to distribute those permits is a wise use of that resource.
Yeah. So when we brought this forward in rural, we did it with the same as antlerless moose. So not once in a lifetime point system, limited entry point system, 5-year waiting period. And then in addition to that, it's you can't get a point unless we offer a hunt for those species that year. We changed that because of the sentiment behind antlerless moose. You had to keep buying a point even if we didn't offer a hunt. But I just, to answer frankly, I see it as a tool. It's a tool to help manage populations when we start to hit densities where we have concerns or start to reach population objectives. And so to give an exact number, how many of these will be coming online over the next few years, I don't know the answer to that. But we're probably going to need to do it as we approach population objectives on the Stansberries, as we approach population objectives. And it's going to be years until we hit that, but we'll hit it. And then we'll start using it to manage Stansberries. We're, like Jay said before, we're getting closer out there on the Oak Creeks, and it'll just be a tool we'll use.
Maybe a follow-up to that is why don't we give cow bison and nanny mountain goat tags their own point system? I think that those species are just as important and even less scarce than our bighorn species. It just seems to me that we should give those tags in a different distribution. I'm all for giving them where needed, but it just seems contradictory to give one of the most scarce populations under a different point system when we do the same with other species as bison and mountain goats. So.
And the answer is pretty simple. We batted this back and forth a lot. It was just sexual dimorphism. So, and what I mean is that for cow bison and for mountain goats, males and females look more similar, and for ewes and for cow moose, they look more different, and so maybe they're less desirable by sportsmen. A nanny goat held was world record doe for several years, and so it's different that way. That's why.
Thank you, Kobe. Steve Lund.
Jason, I'm not familiar with the Newfies, but what I am concerned about is as far as agriculture is concerned and those that run sheep in some of these areas, can you speak to the interaction between the domestic sheep and these sheep and is there a problem with that out here?
Specific to the Newfies.
Yeah.
So the Newfoundland Mountains are great. It's a really cool mountain range out in the middle of the mud flats or the salt flats of what was Lake Bonneville. So think like Bonneville salt flats. And so with a mountain that rises up out of the middle. A really cool spot. On that mountain island, there are no domestic sheep grazing permits, or private or public. So that's a really unique or a good situation there. But there are risks of coming and commingling with domestic sheep. The closest one would be the hog-ups, and then also to the grassy and lakeside mountains. The sheep would have, the bighorns or the domestic would have to cross some of that mud or salt flat that we talked about. But it has happened both ways. We have seen domestic sheep on the Newfoundland mountains, and we have seen bighorns that have made it over to like the grassies, for example. So there is risk. And so it's important, I think, along with the lines of what you're getting at, is it's important that we don't let this herd just grow to a point beyond what the habitat can support, and the densities that would incentivize animals to start leaving the Newfies. Is that kind of what is that the question that you're asking?
That is. Thank you.
Brock, you're muted again.
Other questions for Kobe or Jace? Kobe primarily. Okay, discussion from the RAC regarding the Antlerless recommendations.
Hey, Brock, this is Josh Leonard again. I just wanted to make a comment on this question of the U-hunt. In light of the division's own policy on favoring euthanizing antlerless urban deer as opposed to transplanting them, I know that sheep are a different you know, it's managed differently than deer. However, given that sheep seem to be more likely and susceptible to disease, I'm 100% in favor of this U-hunt. I'll add, anecdotally, I shot a Barbary sheep ewe a few years back on public land, and I can't be happier with that sheep. So I'm very happy and excited to see this hunt potentially come online, and I hope the rest of the RAC votes in support of it.
Thank you, Josh. Other discussion or comments? Okay, I guess I'll entertain any motions that anybody might want. The only thing we've really talked about is the U-hunt. Any motions for the Antlerless?
Brock, Ken Strong here. I'll make a motion that we accept as proposed by the division.
Ben Louder, second.
Thank you. I'm writing this down. Any discussion while I'm writing it down? Hearing none, I'll do a roll call. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the CWMU rule amendments. Jason, I'll turn the time over to you to summarize the public comments.
All right, thank you, Brock. For the CWMU rule R657-37 rule amendments, we had 55%, so a majority of the comments we received were neutral. on the proposal. 39% were supportive, and then another 5% opposed the rule. So primarily neutral, and then beyond that, 39 support and 5 oppose.
Thank you, Jason. Questions from the RAC for Chad? Hearing none, discussion.
I do have a quick question, Brock, Mike Christensen. I noticed that the language has changed from the packet that we were sent out, and we didn't receive a new packet with the new language. Can you just read that new language so we know what we're voting on?
Are you asking Chad or are you asking me?
I would be asking Chad. I believe he has that. Well, maybe.
Yeah, I was just pulling that up. Do you want all of the changes or just that specific one that we'd spoken about?
Just a specific one that was changed midstream.
Okay. Yeah, just 1 second. Okay, so it's number 6 there. So I'll just read all of number 6. So it says big game permits may be allocated using an option from 1, table 1 for moose and pronghorn, or 2, table 2 for elk and deer. And then BI says over the term of the certificate of registration and at all times during the term, at least 40% of the total permits for bull moose and buck pronghorn and at least 60% of the antlerless moose and antlerless pronghorn permits will be allocated to the public and distributed via the public drawing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Chad?
Yeah, Dan Potts here. Hey, I do have one question. One communication that we received indicated that this would allow for, I'll just say, creep into, public hunting opportunities. Would there be any good response to that?
No, this is to preserve the public hunting, preserve those minimums, making sure that they get. What happened was last year we saw some where the split actually was the numbers coming in being recommended were actually under the 40% for pronghorn. In rural, we didn't have pronghorn in there. So this is just to clarify and to put that backing there that they have to stay at least 40% for the pronghorn.
Thank you, Chad. Other questions for Chad? Discussion on the rule amendment.
I have a discussion point. Mike Christensen. I just want to thank Chad and Covey and Justin and Greg for working on this rule amendment. I serve on the CWMU committee with the DWR, and I think this is going to really help clarify things and actually add public opportunities in the long run. So I support it fully.
Thank you, Mike. Any other comments or discussion? I'd entertain a motion.
Mike Christensen, I move that we approve as presented.
This is Josh Leonard. I'll second.
Thanks, Mike and Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll roll call. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker,
Yes.
Mike Christensen,
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the management bison hunts presented by Brad Crompton. I'll turn the time over to Jason Vernon to summarize the public comments.
Hey, Brock, I think we skipped over number 8, the 2020 CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations.
Thank you. The next thing on the agenda is number 8, CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations. I'll turn the time over to Jason Vernon to present the public comments. Thank you, Jason.
You bet, I'm glad to do that. The comments that we received online, 50% supported the proposal, 42% were neutral on the proposal, and 8% were in opposition to the proposal.
Thank you, Jason. Does anybody have questions for Chad? Any comments or discussion items on this motion or recommendation? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
This is Eric Reed. I'll make a motion that we accept the division's proposals as they are.
Okay. Eric's made a motion to accept as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second that. This is AJ.
AJ seconds. Any discussion? I'll call a vote. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Danny Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Now, I believe the next item on the agenda is the management bison hunts. I'll turn the time over to Jason to present the public comment.
All right, similar to the last comments, we had 50% in support of the proposal for the bison hunts on the 9-mile Range Creek units. 42% were neutral, and 8% opposed the proposal.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions for Brad?
I have one, Mike Christensen. Is the willing to work with hunters at all on accessing the old Wilcox Ranch?
The Museum of Natural History has its own management plan that works through access, and there's some controlled access that way where people can get access and permits. I don't know if that answers your question. There's not a whole lot of flexibility built into that. They have a management plan they have to adhere to as well. But there are opportunities for hunters to go in there. Hunters have been hunting deer and elk in that property for many years.
Do you know, are those access permits, are they given, they're given daily, correct? But can a hunter obtain a permit for subsequent days, like in a row?
Yes, you can. You can get them for subsequent days. However, there's not camping allowed on the property, so you have to come out each night. which does complicate it a little bit, but you can get them for several days in a row.
Any other questions for Brad?
This is Ben. I have a question. Do we anticipate this being a one-time hunt, or do we anticipate this ongoing for several years or potentially indefinitely?
We really don't know exactly. The bison could leave, or the harvest could be high, and bison stop using that area, and it could just be a year. It could last several years. It's really hard to tell at this point. We've never done anything quite like this before.
Any other questions? Thank you, Brad. Comments or discussion from the board, from the RAC? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Ben Louder, move to approve as presented.
Ken's make a motion that we accept as proposed.
So Ken, Ben beat you to the point. Do you want a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll roll call. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Annie Potts.
Yeah.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Excellent. The next item on the agenda is Managing Predatory Wildlife Species Policy Revisions by Darren DeBuy. I'll turn the time over to Jason to present public comments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. For this, public comment came in. We had 79% that were supportive of the proposal, 16% that were neutral on the proposal, and then only 5% opposed the proposal that was presented by Darren about managing predatory wildlife species.
Thank you. Questions for Darren?
This is Luke. Not necessarily a question, but
We're not hearing you, Luke.
oh, can you hear me now?
Not very well, but you can try.
How about now? Is it better?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I turned the mic off and on. And I was kind of a question. I was looking at.
I don't think we're getting you, buddy.
I'll try to log back in really quick. I have one question about the wording.
Can anybody hear what he's saying?
He said he's going to log out and log back in really quick.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Mike. Any other questions for Darren while we're waiting for him? I guess we'll wait for a minute.
Ken Strong here, Brock. I just want to commend Darren for what he's doing. I think it's time we address the predator issues, and I think it's a great setup that he's got going.
Thank you, Ken. We could also, anybody else have comments or discussion while we're waiting for Luke?
This is Luke. Can you hear me now?
Better than before, yes.
Quick question on the wording. I noticed in 1 and 3 they talk about carrying capacity instead of population. I was going to population.
Mike, can you translate again?
I can't. Maybe Luke could text question quick, and or maybe he could use the chat feature on the side to type it out really quick.
Yeah, in the top right-hand corner, there's a little bubble, chat bubble up there. Luke, if you want to push on that button and type in your question or your comment, everybody will be able to see that.
Did you get that, Luke?
Brock, it looks like he's logged
Hey
off
guys,
again.
this is Potts.
Oh.
Hey, this is Potts. Hey, you ought to see this huge moon coming up over the horizon. Oh my God.
I'd love to. Let's get done with this meeting. So here he is. So he says on 1A and 3B, it mentions, let me pull it up. It mentions carrying capacity. My question would be why it mentions carrying capacity instead of population objective.
So ideally on a unit, carrying capacity would be reflected in the population objective. Sometimes that's the case and sometimes that's not. It kind of depends on the unit, what the history is there. But really when it comes to predator management and the impacts predators can have on a population, carrying capacity is the thing that you really want to look at. And so that's the thing we focused on. And so we've asked our biologists to keep in mind, where is their herd with regard to what the landscape can support. As you start to manage, as you start to see prey species reach their vegetative carrying capacity, predator management is less effective. They'll just die of other causes, malnutrition or other things, disease, that kind of thing. So that's why we focus on that.
Darren, can I add something to that? And that is that, just so Luke knows, we're going to work to get our population objectives updated so that they reflect carrying capacity. The truth is that number has been so hard to get at in the past, that we have a carrying capacity number. It's just hard to get at, so we've not been able to do it. But with the data we have coming in now, we have better data, and I think on a lot of units we can start to see what that number is and set realistic population objectives.
Thank you, Darren and Covey. Other questions for Darren?
Darren, this is Steve Lund. When it comes to predator management, is there a way to classify whether the predator is lion or coyote, and how do coyotes fit into this, where they fall actually under the purview of the USDA, I think?
Yeah, in Utah, they're managed or the responsibility falls under Utah Department of Agriculture, but we do coyote management. We have the bounty program. We also do some targeted removals in the winter using wildlife services. Yeah, one of the things we wanted to build into this policy is flexibility for district biologists and On some units where we've got good collar data, we're actually getting cause-specific mortality, so we know what predator is taking deer. Coyotes typically have the biggest impact on newly born fawns, young deer, and so we look at that data. Lions tend to take whatever's available on the landscape, and so they'll take all age classes, all sizes, and tend to have an effect throughout the year, whereas coyotes tend to be earlier. So for coyotes, we like to focus on winter removals, breeding pairs, especially if we can get those breeding pairs before they have pups, we can see some benefits there.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yep.
Darren. Other questions from the RAC?
Luke typed another question that said herds are always managed below carrying capacity, so this rule would always be in effect if we don't change it from carrying capacity to population objective. And I think, Luke, honestly, that's inaccurate in our state. In our state, we manage closer to carrying capacity a lot of times, and the reason why is because we don't typically harvest does, if not above carrying capacity. And we have several units that we've seen that we did manage and blew past what carrying capacity was, saw body condition decline. And so there's a range there. Obviously, it's not an exact number, easy number to get at. But we do have herds that are managed right next to or have surpassed carrying capacity.
One thing that we look at too is, what kind of condition are the deer in the herd? If the herd is struggling, but they're in good body condition in December, that would indicate that there's sufficient habitat. They're getting enough to eat, but there's some other cause that's keeping that population suppressed. So those are the kinds of things that we've asked biologists in a policy to look at.
Thank you. Other questions? Another one looks like maybe one. That answered Luke's question.
Darren, this is Josh Leonard. I'm curious, and this might be an aside, but the recent bill that was proposed through the House legislature and on cougar management, how does that going to affect you and the kind of work that you've been doing in compiling this data, since it didn't go through the RAC process?
So there's two things that went into this policy revision. One is that we have really good data on deer. When the last time we wrote this policy, we had some triggers in there, but it was based on the best available information we had at the time. We have a lot better information from our collar study. So Kobe and I talked before the session about revisiting this policy. With the new statute, we also wanted to align our policy with that. So the statute, does four things. Basically, it says that the division director needs to take action if we determine that predators are limiting, and so that's one of the things we're trying to do is determine if that's the case. And then there's some other provisions. They wanted to look at big game hunters having the ability to take predators. That's something we'll be looking at and making a recommendation on when we do lion recommendations in the summer. There's some reporting requirements, but overall the statute aligns really well with the policy, and it wasn't a huge change from what we had in place, but we feel comfortable with where we are on it.
Thank you, Darren. Other questions?
Hey, Darren, I have a question about the coyote hunts and the research that's coming out. The more you suppress the population, the more they breed. Is that a factor that you guys take into consideration?
Yeah, so we do, even though we don't manage coyotes, we do track harvest. So, and it's not all through our bounty system. There are other there's other harvest that goes on, so trapping, that kind of thing. So we do have some indication as to what populations do. There is some literature that would indicate that, and really what it is about releasing resources, as you suppress a population, more resources become available, and coyotes are really good at exploiting those resources. And then they can have larger litter sizes, and they actually can you can see a pretty quick recovery of those populations. But they're also fairly significantly tied to small mammal populations, and so if we see reductions in rabbit numbers, for example, we would expect to see some reductions in coyote densities. Just those are their bread and butter are small mammals, and then they take fawns when they're available in the spring. So does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, so in this new proposal, then if we take out more coyotes, how is that gonna, I guess, never mind. I can answer my own question, so never mind.
Okay.
Hey, and this is Dan Fuss. I had a similar question. Your own data shows that it seems like the more we hunt them, the more they breed.
There's a couple of strategies that we've employed since 2012 when the Mule Deer Protection Act went into effect, and one is sort of a general statewide population strategy, and that's the bounty program. And so people can get $50 if they turn in a coyote if they're part of the program. The other part of that, and probably the most effective part in terms of mule deer numbers, is the targeted approach. And we'll use aerial management using wildlife services, and they actually target coyotes that are in those fawning areas. And the strategy there is, we've seen on the Monroe that can be effective. If you can reduce density, especially breeding pairs, you actually see an increase in fawn recruitment. And so that's sort of the overarching strategy we have for coyotes at the moment.
Darren, this is Steve Lund again. At some point in time, you may not be able to speak to this in this venue, but has wildlife management been reasonably responsive to the needs and in predator control?
Yeah, I'd say generally they've been good. There's some, we have some challenges with resources sometimes, just in terms of available helicopters. When they're trying to cover the whole state, and they may have a couple of ships available. We have tried this year going with a private contract, and that may be something we'll see more of in the future. I'm pretty happy with how that's worked out so far.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other questions for Darren? Discussion or comments regarding the predator policy revisions?
Yeah, Brock, real quick, Josh Leonard, comment for Darren. I've said this at probably every RAC meeting where predators have come up in any form. You talk about private contracts for killing coyotes and aerial gunning and all that. Not opposed to it, but if you're going to kill a predator, I don't care if it's a coyote, a bear, or a cougar, I want to see a hunter kill it, permitted through the system, as opposed to wildlife service or a government trapper. And so whatever you need to do to get hunters to kill more predators as opposed to wildlife services, private contractors, etc., I'm going to support you 100% of the time on that.
Thanks, Josh. And that is in the policy as well. We have a kind of a priority list of how we would move through getting that management done. And the first on the list would be sportsmen. And then if we need, if that's not effective enough, then we'd move down the list. And, third or fourth would be wildlife services take. So that's the intent.
Thank you, Darren. Other discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. That's encouraging to hear.
Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
Hey, Brock, this is Eric. I'll make a motion to accept the proposals as presented by the DWR.
I'll
Thank
second
you.
that.
Who was the second?
The Steve Lund.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll roll call. AJ Maurer.
Yes.
Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
No.
Danny Potts.
No.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Josh Leonard.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker. No. Luke put no. Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Yes. Passes 7-3. Okay. Final item on the agenda. Cougar and Bear rule amendments from Darren DeBluey. I'll turn the time over to Jason Vernon for a summary of the public comments.
All right. As you probably saw in your RAC or in the comments that were sent out to you, there were no comments for this agenda item. We were made aware there was a technical issue with the online comment submission portal, so we didn't receive any comments for this proposal. The information was, however, included in your RAC packets for you to review. And I'll just take a stab at this, and Darren, if there's anything you want to add, please hop in. But the purpose of the amendment is to align the state with state statute that was passed in the last legislative session, as well as the policy revision that you just approved or recommended for approval to the board. Darren, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so this is almost mostly bookkeeping. The new statute obviously would trump our rule, and so we just want to make sure the rule aligns. And there were a couple things that came out of that statute that we needed to change. One is that it increased the time, the active time, from 72 hours to 96 hours when there's a predation event on livestock. And secondarily, it made depredation tags available for bears. If bears are taking livestock, then a landowner could get a permit to help solve the problem. So that's really the two things. But again, the statute spells that out, and we just want to make sure our rule aligns.
And I will add on top of that as well, if there are comments that the public would like to make, there's 3 additional RAC meetings next week. If you go online to our website where we have the presentations, you will be able to provide comments online to one of those RAC meetings if you feel like you missed it on this one.
Thank you, Jason and Darren. Any questions from the RAC? Any discussion or comment from the RAC? I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion. This is Steve. I'll make the motion that we accept the division's recommendations.
Steve Lund has made the motion to accept. Go ahead, AJ, you second.
Yep.
Excellent. The motion on the table is to approve as presented. Any discussion? I'll roll call. AJ Maurer,
Yes.
Ben Louder,
Yes.
Chris Schmitz,
Yes.
Danny Potts,
Yeah.
Eric Reed,
Yes.
Josh Leonard,
Yes.
Ken Strong,
Yes.
Luke Decker. Yes, he said. Mike Christensen,
Yes.
Steve Lund.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. That's the last thing I have on the agenda. So unless somebody else has anything, I want to tell everybody thank you. I think it ran relatively smoothly for being online. I appreciate everybody participating. I think the state's doing great things. Does anybody have anything they want to say before I adjourn this meeting?
Where's the meeting after the meeting tonight?
No kidding, buddy. Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Night.
Thanks, Brock. You did a good job.
Oh, thanks, man.
Well done, guys.
Thanks, Brock. Adios.
Bye-bye.